My name is Dorothy Miller, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in the hallway outside courtroom number 4 at the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland, Oregon. My hands are shaking as I clutch this manila envelope marked with FBI letterhead. Inside this envelope is a document that could either save my life or destroy what's left of my family forever. You see, the people suing me for everything I own, everything my grandmother left me in her will, aren't strangers or business partners. They're my parents, my older sister, and my younger brother. Before we dive into how my own flesh and blood tried to steal my inheritance and frame me as a criminal, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed by family, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story has a twist that will leave you speechless. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I'm Dorothy Miller, a software engineer who spent the last 8 years building a successful career in Silicon Valley. My family always seemed picture perfect from the outside. My father, Harold Miller, is 60 years old and runs a real estate development company here in Portland. He's the kind of man who wears expensive suits and drives a black Mercedes, always talking about his next big deal. My mother, Beverly Miller, is 57 and has been a stay-at-home mom since I was born. She's the type who hosts elaborate dinner parties and volunteers at the country club. Then there's my older sister, Diane Miller Thompson, who's 35 and works as a corporate lawyer downtown. Diane graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School and always made sure everyone knew she was the smartest person in the room. She lives in a sprawling house in the West Hills with her husband Marcus and their twin daughters. My younger brother Kenneth is 28 and claims to run some kind of online business empire, though nobody in the family really understands what he does for work. Everything changed 6 months ago when my beloved grandmother, Eleanor Walsh, passed away at 91. Grandma Eleanor was the heart of our family, the one person who truly understood me. She lived in this beautiful Victorian house in Portland's Pearl District, a place worth about $1,200,000 in today's market. More importantly, she had accumulated about $800,000 in savings and investments over her lifetime. When the will was read at the law office of Peterson and Associates downtown, I was shocked to learn that Grandma Eleanor had left everything to me. Not divided among the 4 grandchildren, not split between her children, but everything directly to me. The reading took place in a mahogany-paneled conference room on the 15th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower. I remember the attorney, Mr. Peterson, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he read the precise legal language that would change my life forever. At first, my family seemed supportive. Dad patted me on the shoulder and said something about how Grandma always had a special connection with me. Mom hugged me and whispered that I deserved it because I was the one who visited her most often. Diane congratulated me with what seemed like genuine warmth, and Kenneth joked that I could finally afford to buy him that new gaming setup he'd been wanting. I had plans for the inheritance. After years of working for tech companies, I wanted to start my own cybersecurity consulting firm. The money from Grandma Eleanor would give me the freedom to build something meaningful, something that could help protect people's digital lives. I even had a name picked out, Walsh Security Solutions, in honor of my grandmother's maiden name. For 2 weeks after the funeral, everything felt normal. We had our usual Sunday dinners at my parents' house on Burnside Street. The house sits on a half-acre lot with a circular driveway and perfectly manicured gardens that Mom spends hours tending. During those dinners, we'd sit around the oak dining table that's been in our family for 3 generations, sharing stories about Grandma Eleanor and planning how to honor her memory. But then I started noticing subtle changes. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. My phone calls weren't returned as quickly. When I suggested using some of the inheritance money to establish a scholarship in Grandma's name at her old high school, the enthusiasm felt forced and hollow. 3 weeks after the will reading, everything came crashing down. Dad called and asked me to meet the family for dinner at the Imperial Garden, this upscale Chinese restaurant on Northwest 23rd Avenue, where we used to celebrate special occasions. The restaurant has these beautiful red lacquered walls and golden dragons painted on the ceiling. We always sat at the large round table in the back corner, the one made of dark rosewood that could seat 8 people comfortably. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, just like Dad had requested. The hostess, a petite woman in a black silk dress, led me to our usual table where my family was already seated. But something felt different immediately. The atmosphere was tense, formal, like a business meeting rather than a family dinner. Dad cleared his throat and got straight to the point. "Dorothy, we need to talk about your grandmother's will." He was wearing his navy blue suit, the one he wore to important business meetings, and his voice had that authoritative tone he used when closing real estate deals. "We've been thinking," Diane chimed in, pulling a black leather briefcase from beneath her chair. "It's not really fair that Grandma left everything to just one person. Family wealth should be shared equally among all the children." She was dressed in her courtroom attire, a charcoal gray blazer with her hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her look severe and calculating. Kenneth nodded enthusiastically from across the table. "Yeah, Dorothy. We're all family here. We should split everything 4 ways. You know, it's only right." He couldn't seem to sit still, constantly checking his phone and fidgeting with his napkin. He was wearing an expensive-looking tracksuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mom sat silently, avoiding eye contact with me completely. She kept twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit I'd noticed since childhood. Her usual warm smile was nowhere to be found. I felt confused and hurt. But Grandma specifically left it to me in her will. She made that choice for her own reasons. My voice came out smaller than I intended, like a child being scolded by adults. "That's exactly the problem," Diane said, opening her briefcase with a sharp click. "We have reason to believe that Grandma wasn't in her right mind when she made those decisions. Alzheimer's can affect judgment long before it becomes obvious to family members." She pulled out a stack of papers that were clearly prepared in advance. Legal documents, official-looking forms, and what appeared to be affidavits from people I didn't recognize. "I've drawn up papers that would allow us to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity, but we'd prefer to handle this within the family." The blood drained from my face. Grandma was completely sharp until the day she died. You all know that. She was reading 3 books a week and beating us all at Scrabble just last Christmas. "Memory games don't prove mental capacity when it comes to major financial decisions," Diane replied coldly, her lawyer voice in full effect. "There are legal precedents for situations exactly like this. Adult children can successfully challenge wills when there's evidence of undue influence or cognitive decline." Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Look, sweetheart, we're not trying to hurt you. We just think it would be better for everyone if we divided things equally. You'd still get $300,000 plus a quarter of the house value. That's more than enough to start your little computer business." The way he said, "little computer business," made my skin crawl. He was dismissing my career, my dreams, my entire professional life with those 3 condescending words. Kenneth kept glancing at his phone throughout the conversation, typing quick messages when he thought nobody was looking. "Come on, sis. Don't be greedy. 300 grand is still a fortune. Most people never see that kind of money in their entire lives." I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to love and support me. The family that had raised me celebrated my achievements and comforted me through heartbreaks. Now they were sitting here like a corporate board demanding I hand over my inheritance because they had decided it wasn't fair. "I need time to think about this," I said, standing up from the table. The conversation had lasted exactly 27 minutes, but it felt like hours. "Don't take too long," Diane warned, sliding a business card across the table. "Legal proceedings can be expensive and emotionally draining for everyone involved. It would be much better to resolve this quietly within the family." I left the restaurant that night knowing that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my family. The drive home to my apartment in the Hawthorne district felt like traveling through a foreign country. Everything looked the same, but somehow the entire world had changed. Over the next week, the pressure intensified dramatically. Diane called me every single day, sometimes multiple times, with new arguments about why I should sign over the inheritance. Her calls usually came during my lunch break at work, disrupting my focus and making it impossible to concentrate on my projects. Dorothy, I've been researching the legal precedents, she'd say in her professional attorney voice. There are dozens of cases where wills have been successfully overturned based on undue influence. Grandma was isolated from the rest of the family in her final months, and you were the primary person she had contact with. That creates a very strong case for manipulation. The accusations stung because they were so far from the truth. I visited Grandma Eleanor every Sunday because I genuinely enjoyed her company. We'd sit in her sunroom overlooking the garden, drinking tea from her good china, and talking about everything from world politics to the books she was reading. She was one of the sharpest, most intellectually curious people I'd ever known. Dad took a different approach. He'd call me in the evenings, usually after he'd had a few drinks, and try the emotional manipulation route. "Your mother is having trouble sleeping," he'd tell me. "She's so worried about this family conflict. You know how much family unity means to her. We raised you better than to be selfish with money." These conversations left me feeling guilty and confused. Was I being selfish? Had I misunderstood Grandma's intentions? Maybe she really did want the money to be shared among all her grandchildren, and the will was just poorly written. But then Kenneth started his own campaign, and that's when things got really ugly. He began posting on social media about greedy family members who care more about money than relationships. He never mentioned my name directly, but anyone who knew our family could figure out who he was talking about. His Facebook posts got dozens of likes and comments from extended family members and family friends. People who had no idea what was really happening but were quick to judge based on his carefully crafted narrative. Mom's strategy was perhaps the most painful of all. She simply stopped talking to me completely. When I called the house, she'd hand the phone to Dad without saying a word. When I showed up for our usual Sunday dinner, she'd serve me food but wouldn't make eye contact or respond to my attempts at conversation. It was like I'd become invisible, a ghost haunting my own family. 3 weeks into this psychological warfare, something inside me snapped. I decided to hire a private investigator to look into my family's financial situation. If they were this desperate for money, there had to be a reason. I found Margaret Walsh, no relation to my grandmother despite the shared last name, through a recommendation from a colleague at work. Margaret had 20 years of experience in financial investigations and came highly recommended by the Portland Police Bureau. "Give me 2 weeks," she said during our meeting at her office in the Lloyd district. "If there are financial problems in your family, I'll find them." Margaret was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked brown hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see right through people. Her office was small but organized, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a computer setup that looked more advanced than anything we had at my tech company. What she discovered in those 2 weeks shattered my understanding of my family completely. Kenneth wasn't running a successful online business empire. He was drowning in gambling debts to the tune of $450,000. Margaret found records of his activities at casinos in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and several illegal gambling operations right here in Portland. He'd been betting on everything from sports games to online poker, losing consistently for the past 3 years. Dad's real estate company was on the verge of bankruptcy. He'd been taking out loans against properties he didn't fully own, double mortgaging buildings, and using money from new investors to pay back previous debts. It was a classic Ponzi scheme that was about to collapse. According to Margaret's research, he owed various creditors over $800,000. But the most shocking discovery involved Mom. Sweet, innocent Beverly Miller had been systematically draining Grandma Eleanor's bank accounts for the past 18 months. Using her access as emergency contact and power of attorney for healthcare decisions, she'd been making small withdrawals that added up to over $60,000. And Diane, my accomplished lawyer sister, had just gone through a messy divorce that cost her everything. Her ex-husband Marcus had been awarded the house, the cars, and most of their joint assets after it came out that Diane had been having an affair with a client. She was currently living in a studio apartment downtown and struggling to keep up with child support payments for her twin daughters. "Your family isn't just broke," Margaret told me when she presented her findings. "They're all facing serious financial disasters. Your inheritance isn't just a windfall for them, it's a lifeline. Without that money, your brother could face criminal charges for his unpaid gambling debts. Your father's company will declare bankruptcy and possibly face fraud investigations. Your mother could be prosecuted for elder financial abuse, and your sister might lose custody of her children due to financial instability." The picture became crystal clear. This wasn't about fairness or family unity. This was about survival. My family was drowning in debt and criminal liability, and my grandmother's money was the only thing that could save them. 2 months after that devastating dinner at the Imperial Garden, I received a thick manila envelope delivered by certified mail to my apartment. Inside were official court documents with the header, Multnomah County Circuit Court, and the case number CV 2024-7. The title read, Harold Miller, Beverly Miller, Diane Miller Thompson, and Kenneth Miller versus Dorothy Miller. Contest of Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Walsh. My hands shook as I read the formal legal language accusing me of the most horrible things imaginable. According to the lawsuit, I had systematically isolated the decedent from her family members during the final months of her life, and used undue influence and manipulation to coerce a mentally incapacitated elderly woman into changing her will. The allegations were specific and damaging. They claimed I had convinced Grandma Eleanor that her other grandchildren didn't love her. They said I had restricted their access to her home and monitored her phone calls. Most devastatingly, they accused me of taking advantage of her declining mental state to manipulate her into leaving me everything. As supporting evidence, they had gathered statements from several people I'd never heard of. A neighbor named Mrs. Patterson claimed she'd witnessed me raising my voice at Grandma Eleanor in her front yard. A home health aide named Carmen Rodriguez said she'd observed signs of fear in my grandmother's behavior around me. A pharmacist named David Chen stated that I had been controlling my grandmother's medications and preventing other family members from discussing her health care. Every single allegation was either completely false or a twisted version of innocent interactions. Yes, I had helped Grandma Eleanor manage her medications, but only because she asked me to after she started having trouble reading the small print on the bottles. Yes, I had been the primary point of contact with her healthcare providers, but that was because she trusted me to understand the medical information and communicate it clearly to the rest of the family. The lawsuit demanded that the will be declared invalid due to my undue influence and that all assets be distributed equally among Harold, Beverly, Diane, and Kenneth Miller. They were also seeking damages for emotional distress and asking for me to pay all legal fees for both sides of the case. Reading that document felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. These people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had crafted a legal narrative that painted me as a predatory manipulator who had stolen from a helpless old woman. They were asking a judge to declare me a criminal and take away everything Grandma Eleanor had wanted me to have. That evening, I called the one person I knew I could trust completely, Dr. Albert Richardson, who had been Grandma Eleanor's primary physician for over 15 years. Dr. Richardson was a gentle man in his 70s who had been treating elderly patients in Portland since the 1980s. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry to hear about this lawsuit," he said when I explained the situation. "Your grandmother was one of the sharpest patients I've ever had. Right up until her final appointment 6 weeks before she passed, she was asking detailed questions about current events, discussing books she'd read, and making complex decisions about her health care with perfect clarity. Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" I asked. "Absolutely. I have detailed medical records documenting her cognitive function. There was never any sign of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any condition that would have affected her decision-making capacity. In fact, I specifically noted in her file that she was mentally acute and fully competent during our last several visits." Dr. Richardson also revealed something that made my blood boil. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me. About 6 months before your grandmother passed, your father Harold came to my office asking about her mental state. He wanted to know if I thought she was becoming forgetful or showing signs of cognitive decline. When I told him she was sharper than people half her age, he seemed disappointed. At the time, I thought it was just normal family concern, but now I'm wondering if he was fishing for ammunition to use against her will. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. My family hadn't just decided to contest the will after Grandma Eleanor died. They had been planning this for months, possibly even before she passed away. Harold's visit to Dr. Richardson wasn't about concern for his mother-in-law's health. It was reconnaissance for a legal challenge they were already contemplating. This revelation pushed me over the edge from hurt and confusion into pure determination. I wasn't going to let my family destroy Grandma Eleanor's final wishes and steal the inheritance she had specifically chosen to leave to me. If they wanted a legal fight, I was going to give them one they'd never forget. I hired Robert Shaw, one of Portland's most respected estate litigation attorneys. Robert had been practicing law for 30 years and had never lost a will contest case. His office occupied an entire floor of the historic Multnomah Athletic Club building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. "Dorothy," he said during our first meeting, "based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided, this case should be relatively straightforward. Your grandmother was clearly competent. The will was properly executed, and there's no evidence of undue influence. But I have to warn you, family litigation can get very ugly very quickly. Are you prepared for your family to say terrible things about you in open court?" I thought about Grandma Eleanor sitting in her sunroom with a cup of Earl Grey tea, telling me stories about growing up during the Great Depression. She'd worked her entire life, saved every penny she could, and made careful decisions about how to leave her money to someone who would honor her memory and use it wisely. "Yes," I told Robert. "I'm ready to fight for what she wanted." What I wasn't prepared for was just how deep the rabbit hole would go. As Robert and I began preparing our defense, we uncovered financial crimes that went back years and painted my family as career criminals, rather than desperate people making bad decisions. Robert hired forensic accountants to examine the financial records we'd subpoenaed from my family. What they found was staggering. Harold hadn't just mismanaged his real estate business. He had been running an elaborate fraud scheme since 2019. He'd been creating fake property appraisals, forging inspection reports, and selling properties he didn't legally own to unsuspecting investors. The forensic team found evidence that Harold had used Grandma Eleanor's personal information to open credit accounts in her name. Over the past 2 years, he'd accumulated over $40,000 in debt, using her identity, then made minimum payments from his own accounts to prevent her from finding out. Kenneth's gambling problem was even worse than the private investigator had initially discovered. He wasn't just betting and losing money. He was involved in an illegal sports betting operation that was connected to organized crime. The FBI had been investigating the gambling ring for 8 months, and Kenneth's name appeared in their surveillance records over 200 times. But the most shocking discovery involved Beverly and Diane working together to systematically steal from elderly clients. Using Beverly's connections at the country club and Diane's legal expertise, they had been targeting wealthy widows and widowers for what amounted to financial elder abuse. Beverly would befriend lonely seniors at social events, gradually gaining their trust and learning about their financial situations. Then Diane would approach them offering legal services, eventually convincing them to sign power of attorney documents that gave her control over their assets. Together, they had stolen over $300,000 from at least 7 different victims over the past 4 years. "Dorothy," Robert said during a meeting in his office 3 weeks before the trial, "your family isn't just trying to steal your inheritance. They're career criminals who have been running multiple fraud operations for years. This isn't desperation. This is their business model." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, forged documents with Harold's signature, audio recordings of Kenneth discussing gambling debts with known criminals. email correspondence between Beverly and Diane planning their elder abuse schemes. "We need to contact the FBI," Robert said. "This goes way beyond a family dispute over a will. These people have committed serious federal crimes." That's how I found myself sitting across a desk from Special Agent Janet Morrison at the FBI field office in Portland. Agent Morrison was a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and the kind of intense focus that made you feel like she could see into your soul. "Ms. Miller," she said, after reviewing the evidence we'd gathered, "your family has been on our radar for several months due to the gambling investigation involving your brother. What you've provided gives us probable cause to open a full investigation into their other activities." Agent Morrison explained that financial crimes against the elderly were a federal priority, especially when they crossed state lines or involved organized crime connections. Kenneth's gambling debts to out-of-state operations automatically made it a federal case. "We're going to coordinate with the district attorney's office to make arrests," she told me. "But we'd like to do it during your civil trial if possible. Having them all in one place will make the operation cleaner, and the timing will prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing." The plan was audacious. While my family thought they were coming to court to steal my inheritance, federal agents would be waiting to arrest them for crimes they'd been committing for years. Agent Morrison would be sitting in the courtroom gallery, watching and waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. "Ms. Miller, I want you to understand that once we make these arrests, there's no going back. Your family will face serious federal charges that could result in decades in prison. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" I thought about all the elderly people my mother and sister had victimized. I thought about the investors my father had defrauded. I thought about Grandma Eleanor, who had trusted these people and never suspected they were stealing from her even as she lay dying. "Yes," I said. "Do it." October 15th, 2024. The day that would change everything. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning in my apartment, having barely slept for 3 hours. My stomach was churning with anxiety, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I got dressed in my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to Grandma Eleanor's funeral. The Multnomah County Courthouse sits on Southwest 4th Avenue, an imposing building of gray stone with classical columns that make it look like a temple to justice. I arrived at 8:15 for our 9 o'clock hearing, carrying my briefcase and the manila envelope that contained the FBI evidence. Robert met me in the hallway outside courtroom number 4. "Dorothy, are you ready for this? Once we hand over that FBI documentation, there's no turning back. Your family will be arrested today." "I'm ready," I said, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows on everything. Judge Patricia Williams presided from an elevated bench that made her look both authoritative and intimidating. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a bun and wire-rimmed glasses that she constantly adjusted while reading documents. My family entered the courtroom at exactly 8:55, dressed like they were attending a business meeting rather than trying to destroy my life. Harold wore his most expensive charcoal gray suit with a red tie that probably cost more than some people's weekly salary. Beverly was dressed in a conservative black dress with pearls, looking like the perfect grieving daughter-in-law. Diane had on her power lawyer outfit, a navy blue blazer with matching skirt that screamed professional competence. Kenneth wore the only suit he owned, a black one that looked slightly too big for his thin frame. None of them looked at me as they took their seats at the plaintiff's table, with their attorney Marcus Webb, a man in his 50s who specialized in will contests and had a reputation for playing dirty. Agent Morrison sat in the back row of the gallery, looking like any other court observer in her gray pantsuit and minimal makeup. 2 other agents posing as reporters sat near the front with notepads ready to document everything that happened. Judge Williams called the court to order at 9:05. "We're here today in the matter of Miller v. Miller case number CV 2024-7, a contest of the last will and testament of Eleanor Walsh. Mr. Webb, you may present your opening statement." Marcus Webb stood up and launched into a performance that was both professional and disgusting. He painted my family as loving, concerned relatives who had watched helplessly as I manipulated their beloved grandmother. He spoke about the undue influence I had supposedly exerted, the isolation I had imposed, and the mental deterioration that my grandmother had supposedly suffered. Your Honor, Webb said in his smooth courtroom voice, the evidence will show that Dorothy Miller systematically cut off Eleanor Walsh from her family, exploited her diminishing mental capacity, and coerced her into changing a will that had previously distributed assets equally among all grandchildren. He presented his evidence with theatrical flair. The neighbor who claimed she'd heard me yelling. The home health aide who said Grandma Eleanor seemed afraid of me. The pharmacist who testified about my controlling behavior regarding medications. Each witness had been carefully coached to tell a story that painted me as a predator and my family as victims. Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 70s with gray hair and thick glasses, testified that she'd seen me shouting at my grandmother in the front yard. What she'd actually witnessed was me helping Grandma Eleanor understand how to use her new smartphone to video chat with her sister in California. Carmen Rodriguez, the home health aide, claimed that Grandma Eleanor had confided in her about feeling pressured to change her will. This was completely fabricated. Carmen had only worked for my grandmother for 2 weeks before Grandma Eleanor decided she didn't need professional help and could manage fine on her own. David Chen, the pharmacist, testified that I had been aggressively controlling my grandmother's medications and preventing other family members from discussing her health care. The truth was that I had simply picked up her prescriptions when she couldn't drive herself to the pharmacy, exactly like thousands of other grandchildren do for their elderly relatives. For 2 hours I sat there listening to these people lie under oath about me and my relationship with Grandma Eleanor. My family sat at their table looking appropriately sad and concerned, occasionally dabbing at their eyes with tissues, as if they were heartbroken over my supposed betrayal. When it was our turn to present evidence, Robert stood up and systematically demolished every allegation they'd made. He called Dr. Richardson to testify about Grandma Eleanor's perfect mental health. He presented medical records documenting her cognitive sharpness right up until her death. He showed bank records proving that I had never accessed her accounts or received any money from her before the inheritance. But the real bombshell came when Robert called Margaret Walsh, the private investigator, to testify about what she'd discovered regarding my family's financial situation. Ms. Walsh, Robert said, please tell the court what your investigation revealed about the financial status of the plaintiffs in this case. Margaret opened her file and began reading from her report. Harold Miller owes approximately $800,000 to various creditors and is facing bankruptcy. Kenneth Miller has gambling debts totaling $450,000 to illegal bookmaking operations. Beverly Miller has been systematically withdrawing money from Eleanor Walsh's accounts without authorization totaling over $60,000. Diane Miller Thompson recently lost most of her assets in a divorce and is struggling financially. The courtroom erupted. Webb jumped to his feet, shouting objections. My family looked like they'd been hit by lightning. Judge Williams banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But we weren't done yet. Your Honor, Robert continued, the evidence shows that this will contest isn't about fairness or family unity. It's about desperate people trying to steal money to pay their debts and avoid criminal prosecution. That's when I stood up. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I knew this was my moment. Your Honor, I said, my voice somehow steady despite my terror. Before we conclude, I have one more piece of evidence that the court needs to see. I walked forward and handed Judge Williams the manila envelope marked with FBI letterhead. This contains documentation of federal crimes committed by the plaintiffs in this case. Judge Williams opened the envelope and began reading. Her expression changed from professional neutrality to shock to what looked like anger. She read for what felt like an eternity while the entire courtroom sat in complete silence. Finally, she looked up and spoke the words that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Bailiff, lock the doors. No one leaves this courtroom. The bailiff, a large man named Officer Davis, immediately moved to secure the courtroom exits. My family started looking around frantically, Harold loosening his tie, Beverly clutching her purse, Diane whispering urgently to her attorney Kenneth, staring at his phone like it might provide an escape route. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Williams announced, "this court is now a crime scene. Federal agents will be taking some of the participants in this proceeding into custody." Agent Morrison stood up and flashed her badge. "FBI, Harold Miller, Beverly Miller, Diane Miller Thompson, and Kenneth Miller, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder financial abuse, identity theft, and racketeering." The next few minutes were chaos. Kenneth tried to run for the back exit, but was tackled by Agent Morrison's partner. Beverly started crying hysterically, asking how this could be happening. Diane demanded to see the charges and threatened to sue everyone in the room. Harold just sat there in stunned silence as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. As federal agents led my family out of the courtroom in chains, Judge Williams turned to me with something that almost looked like a smile. "Ms. Miller, based on the evidence presented today, I'm ruling in your favor. The will of Eleanor Walsh stands as written. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for possible prosecution of perjury charges against the witnesses who lied in my courtroom today." 6 months have passed since that incredible day in court, and I'm still processing everything that happened. My family is now serving federal prison sentences that reflect the seriousness of their crimes. Harold received 8 years for wire fraud and identity theft. Beverly got 5 years for elder financial abuse and conspiracy. Diane was sentenced to 6 years and lost her law license permanently. Kenneth received 7 years for his involvement in the gambling operation and money laundering scheme. The civil case was resolved in my favor within a week of their arrests. I received the full inheritance exactly as Grandma Eleanor had intended, plus additional compensation for the money my mother had stolen from my grandmother's accounts. The court also ordered my family to pay all legal fees for both sides of the case, though obviously they have no money to actually pay those judgments. But more importantly, 7 elderly victims of my mother and sister's elder abuse scheme received justice. The money stolen from them was recovered and returned, and they were able to see their abusers held accountable in court. Mrs. Anderson, an 82-year-old widow who lost $40,000 to Beverly and Diane's scheme, sent me a handwritten thank you note that I keep framed on my desk. The transition hasn't been easy. Losing your entire family to federal prison, even when they deserved it, creates a kind of grief that's hard to describe. I went through months of therapy to process the betrayal and learn how to trust people again. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I'd done the right thing, if there had been some other way to handle the situation that wouldn't have destroyed so many lives. But then I think about Grandma Eleanor, and I know I made the right choice. She spent 91 years working hard, saving money, and making careful decisions about her legacy. She chose to leave her assets to me because she trusted me to use them wisely and honor her memory. Letting my family steal that inheritance would have been the real betrayal. I used the money exactly as I'd planned. Walsh Security Solutions is now a thriving cybersecurity consulting firm that specializes in protecting elderly clients from online fraud and financial scams. We've helped over 200 seniors secure their digital lives and avoid becoming victims of the kind of schemes my own family was running. I also established the Eleanor Walsh Foundation, which provides legal assistance to elderly people who are victims of financial abuse by family members. We've helped dozens of seniors recover stolen money and hold their abusers accountable. Every time we win a case, I think about how proud Grandma Eleanor would be that her money is being used to protect other vulnerable seniors. The hardest part of this entire experience wasn't the legal battles or the public embarrassment or even the financial stress. It was learning that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were capable of such calculated cruelty. They weren't desperate people who made bad decisions in a moment of panic. They were career criminals who had been stealing from vulnerable people for years, and they saw my inheritance as just another score to be divided among the crew. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships or shared genetics. Real family consists of people who support your dreams, celebrate your successes, and stand by you during difficult times. I found that family among my colleagues at work, my friends from college, and the community of people I've met through my business and foundation work. Dr. Richardson, my grandmother's physician, has become like a grandfather to me. Margaret Walsh, the private investigator who uncovered the truth about my family, is now one of my closest friends. Agent Morrison and I stay in touch, and she often refers elderly victims of financial crimes to my foundation for help. Sometimes people ask me if I regret turning in my family to the FBI. They wonder if I feel guilty about sending my parents and siblings to federal prison. The answer is complicated, but ultimately no. I don't regret it. What I regret is that it took a federal investigation to reveal who my family really was. I regret that I spent 32 years loving people who saw me as nothing more than a potential victim to be exploited. I regret that Grandma Eleanor never knew her own daughter was stealing from her accounts while she lay dying. But I don't regret fighting for justice. I don't regret honoring my grandmother's wishes. And I don't regret choosing truth over family loyalty when those two things came into conflict. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you love. Sometimes protecting yourself and others requires making choices that feel brutal in the moment, but are necessary for long-term healing and justice. If you're watching this and you're dealing with financial abuse or manipulation from family members, please know that you're not alone, and it's not your fault. There are resources available to help you, legal protections you can pursue, and people who will believe your story, even when it seems impossible. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Document everything you can. Seek help from professionals who understand these situations. And remember that choosing justice over family loyalty doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a strong person who refuses to be a victim. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. And sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is stand up to the people who are supposed to love you when they're trying to destroy you instead. Family should be a source of love, support, and encouragement. When it becomes a source of exploitation, manipulation, and abuse, you have every right to protect yourself, even if that protection comes at a cost that feels devastating. My grandmother always told me that the truth has a way of coming out eventually, no matter how well people think they've hidden it. She was right about that, just like she was right about so many other things. The truth about my family's criminal activities couldn't stay buried forever, and I'm grateful that I had the courage to help bring it to light. Today I live in my grandmother's beautiful Victorian house in the Pearl District. I kept all of her furniture, her books, her china, and her garden. Every morning I have my coffee in the sunroom, where we used to sit and talk, and I can feel her presence encouraging me to keep fighting for justice and using my resources to help other people. That's the real legacy she left me. Not just the money in the house, but the understanding that wealth comes with responsibility. The responsibility to help others to stand up for what's right, and to never let fear keep you from doing what you know is correct. So let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were hiding dark secrets? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your stories and support anyone who's going through something similar. If this story helped you in any way, please hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice. And please share this video with anyone who might be dealing with family financial abuse, because knowledge is power, and no one should have to face these situations alone. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most important victories. Until next time, stay strong and trust your instincts.